We have a quorum, and so we'll get cracking in about a minute. Do I have one? Parties. Righty-ho. Morning, everyone, and welcome to the first Transport Resilience Infrastructure Committee meeting for 2025. Good to have you here. Just first item is apologies, and we've got a number of varying types of apologies. So we have for lateness, Mayor Wayne Brown on council business, Chris Darby, Daniel Newman, Ken Turner, and Greg Sayers. Also then early departure, Billy Brown from OMSB, Chris Fletcher, the Deputy Chair, Julie Ferry, Wayne Walker, and the Deputy Mayor, Desley Simpson.
I don't know what early departure means, because
It's before we finish.
well, they've put me down as early departure.
I think.
I have no
We
idea.
don't know when we're finishing yet.
I have no idea when it'll be, but I'll be gone before.
Yeah.
No, what is the time? Is it 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock they're leaving? Or?
1:30 is, and for two of them, 3:30 is for another. So I'm hoping.
I wish to, as Deputy Chair, say that mine is on council business. We have the Auckland Future Board meeting, so apologies that I'm leaving early.
So hopefully, yeah, no, we won't be here at 6, I can assure you. So hopefully, with your indulgence, councillors, we will be finished before all of that comes to fruition in your court. So any other apologies? Okay, would someone like to move? Thank you, Chris, and second, Shane. Those in favour say aye, and against carried. We have a number of requests for electronic attendance. So Mayor Wayne Brown, Alf, Lotu and Kieran. Someone like to move? Thanks, Chris. Seconder. Thanks, Angela. Those in favour say aye. Against carried. Just a reminder in regards to declarations of interest. If you have any, have we got any? No one interested? Outstanding. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting of the 5th of December. Someone like to move? Thanks, Chris. Seconder. Thanks, Shane. Any discussion? Those in favour say aye, and against carried. We have no petitions, and we do have public input for Graham East, who is yet to make it. So unusual for Graham to be not here on time, but we'll just hold that then, and we will go to local board input. And so pleasure to welcome up Henderson Massey Local Board, Brooke. And who? And Dan. All yours.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Today I am here with my colleague Dan Collins, and firstly I wanted to say thank you for the opportunities to speak to the Transport and Infrastructure Committee meeting today. It's very appropriate that we as a Henderson Massey Local Board speak to you right now, just after the second anniversary of the storm events that shocked our region and have affected thousands of Aucklanders ever since. Now, the West has a not so proud history of missing out on important stuff, and that's why we are here today, as we are paranoid about something potentially being taken away from us. So on today's agenda later today, you'll face a decision about the prioritisation of funding for Tranche 2 of the Blue-Green Networks, of which staff have recommended prioritising Clover Drive Blue-Green Network. After workshopping this with council staff, it is the unanimous view of our local board that we support staff advice to prioritise the Clover Drive Blue-Green Network, as it is a concentration of the most heavily affected areas, including Campbell Place, Clover Drive, and the Don Buck Bridge, where Councillor Henderson became an emergency responder, redirecting traffic in the storm. Now,
Thank you, councillors. Councillors, it's critically important that the project goes ahead as planned and with no elements removed. As you all know, this area was one of the worst affected in the anniversary weekend floods, and while many of the Category 3 residents can move on with their lives, there are many residents who remain who are only an inch or two away from being Category 3 who have to live in an area that was affected really badly. I know of one resident who had an inch of water coming into her house. She still has to remain there. She was trapped in her home on the day. She had 2 small children, and whenever it rains now, 2 years on, her anxiety absolutely hits the roof. She and many other residents desperately need the project to go ahead, so when a similar event occurs, and it's a matter of when, not if, they'll have reassurance that they've got a level of protection that will keep them safe.
And on that note as well, today you'll hear of a large funding shortfall for this project, as more homes were affected than were originally forecast. And so for WAIF and the Ranui community who live on Clover Drive, this is really a good news story for them, so thank you very much for prioritising them. However, this means that other areas will not have funding committed. We're most concerned that the Faux Stream, Ehrlich Esplanade Reserve and Henderson Park are categorised as minor blue-green networks. We're advised that design work will continue under existing Healthy Waters and Flood Resilience Department budgets, but future funding has not been secured for the implementation. So we advocate that Council should investigate securing budget for the other remaining projects as well, particularly Henderson and Ehrlich, acknowledging that Clover Drive will be prioritised first. And on the topic of funding redirection, so it has been suggested in your report that funding for this should be from Healthy Waters and Flood Resilience budgets in the Henderson Massey Local Board area. That's at paragraph 10. So that would be covering the funding shortfall. However, these projects are projects to upgrade existing pipes to accommodate future growth in Henderson Massey. We strongly disagree that funding should be redirected. To be clear, it's a redirection, not reprioritisation of that funding. It is well known that Henderson Massey is one of the highest rates of housing intensification, with Red Hills being identified as part of Council's future growth strategy. At this very moment, we've got sewage being tankered out in trucks in Red Hills because there are no pipes to take it away. We've got no infrastructure. And likewise in Te Atatu Peninsula, right now you can see sewage pouring into our significant ecological areas, such as Harbourview or Rangahina. So redirection funding is really just kicking the can down the road and increasing that environmental impact. And this will cost more later. We haven't been advised where specifically the funding will be redirected from, and that's not in the report. However, an example that comes to mind for me personally is we had a workshop on Tuesday. We talked about proposed stormwater reticulation projects in Te Atatu Peninsula, and that area has got high growth, and they also experienced significant flooding during the storm event, but aren't part of that blue-green strategy network. However, if that project doesn't go ahead, we are concerned about the ability for these places to cope if there is a repeat storm event. So other avenues of funding through Council should be explored instead. Now, it's all good coming to you with a problem, but what could be the solution, right? So what about potential redevelopment to recuperate costs? So we in Henderson have the issue with housing, not just here, but nationwide. We are advocates for our Ranui residents who are going to face the brunt of this. We've got high demand for housing, yet we're having houses being demolished, and our community is humbly proud to be in Ranui as a Ranui resident. So consideration should be made for future redevelopment in this area to encourage residents to return to Ranui. However, we have to make sure that safety is not compromised should any future redevelopment be considered. And there should be enough housing developed so that there isn't a net loss in total housing. Having more residents back in this redevelopment area will contribute to a thriving sense of community that there is in Ranui. Importantly, any profit from the redevelopment needs to be ring-fenced and reinvested into the blue-green infrastructure in Henderson Massey. So, for example, as I said earlier, the minor Ehrlich and Henderson blue-green networks. This could be a solution to the funding shortfall caused by more Category 3 properties than expected, but it only will work if the funds generated from the development are ring-fenced and recycled back to that affected area.
Kia ora. So we've come to you with a solution and a problem today, and I hope you'll consider that. I'll wrap it up now. Look, Brooke rightfully mentioned that the West has the unfortunate reputation of missing out, and I'm sure you're used to hearing that narrative from local boards and councillors, but it's not narrative, is it? It's fact. We miss out on things that other parts of Tamaki Makaurau take for granted. Clover Drive Blue-Green Network, it's a great news story for our Rānui community who have suffered the most, and we really thank you for recognising that and for the work that's gone into it to date. We support the prioritisation of the Clover Drive Blue-Green Network and for the project to proceed with no elements removed. We do have concerns about the redirection of other infrastructure funding in Henderson Massey, and consider there may be opportunities to redevelop land that can increase housing in Henderson Massey and keep our Rānui community together. Councillors, thank you for your time. Ngā mi nui kia koutou, ka mai te pai.
Thank you, Brooke. Thanks, Dan. So questions? Shane.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, look, that's a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for coming in. And just before I ask my question, just to acknowledge your strong advocacy. I know you were both out on the night of the flood, and also all the work that you do at the board table as well as on the ground in the community. So kia ora for that. Look, I want to ask you about the redirection of local board healthy waters budgets and the chance this could affect much needed infrastructure in the board area. For those that aren't familiar with the area here, how much future growth are you expecting in the board over the next 10 years?
So in terms of future growth, in the last year, Te Atu Peninsula had the highest number of resource consents issued for intensification, and I'm the resource consent lead for the local board, so that gave me a lot more work to have to do a lot more revising than I would usually do. So I've seen that personally in Te Atu Peninsula, but also I must remind you that Red Hills is the next jury, so Red Hills is going to have 30,000 new residents, I think that's expected, and so that's going to be a huge area that needs a lot more investment in terms of infrastructure. And I'm reminded of one of Ken Turner's posts about the tankering of sewage already, right? And it's quite funny that we've got residents moving in there, and they don't even have a method for their toilet waste to go to effect, to get processed, and it's going out by trucks, and we need that funding to be able to make sure that Red Hills gets that necessary infrastructure funding that it needs.
Quick follow-up, because I know we're celebrating today in a way. We're getting Clover Drive across the line, which is a fantastic effort, and I want to acknowledge you for that. You guys have been instrumental in that. But just to sort of put a fine point on that point that we've just discussed, do you think that there'll be a risk of a slowdown in housing growth if we do lose funding for the infrastructure that's needed? I mean, you've said peninsula is the most number of resource consents. It's a peninsula, right? So what's the risk there if you don't have enough funding, infrastructure-wise? What happens to the housing growth?
I don't foresee a slowdown in housing growth due to infrastructure. It hasn't happened so far. Te Atu Peninsula is absolutely slammed, as is other parts of Henderson Massey. It hasn't been a barrier to date. I don't anticipate it would be now, but what it will create is a hell of a problem moving forward. The redirection of the funds is really a bugbear for us. We can fix Clover Drive. We can chip in our bit for that. That leaves these problems that have been decades in the making and that being compounded by more housing getting worse. We're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and we need to find a way around that.
Yeah, and just to play devil's advocate on that, I look at it from the perspective of the developers and the real estate agents, and if they see this kind of risk from the governing body and they don't have that infrastructure to be able to put in these developments, perhaps that will mean the developers will not want to progress growth as much as they'd anticipated. I mean, people want to buy the houses, people want to move in, yes, but the reputation that we have, if you look at the community pages, for example, it's not a good one at the moment. The people that are moving in there at the moment aren't happy, and if you look at that in terms of a developer coming in and trying to transform a site, maybe that means that the developer itself will want to slow down his own, project planning.
Interesting. Thank you so much for the points. Thanks, Jen.
Okay, so just two more questions. So first one from Angela.
Thank you both for your presentation and thank you for providing the solution. My question was around that. Do you know, have you had officer advice if the local boards have the appropriate delegations to be able to do that within your asset base? I'm supportive. I think local boards should be able to reinvest, use their assets, reinvest for the right outcomes for community. Obviously, they would need to be aligned with the broader regional network plans and whatever that is. Have you been able to speak to officers about that?
We haven't yet, but I think as part of our increased delegations and obviously we've had a big revision on local board powers, I'm hoping that we are able to, basically moving forward from now.
I'd be really interested to keep in contact about that and what barriers there may or may not be alongside Councillor Ferry.
Thank you.
Squinting.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
And last one, Richard.
Kia ora, thanks, Jen. Thank you for the presentation. Just doesn't need a long answer, but have you written to your local MPs and the government because this is not necessarily our favourite thing to do is try and find more money, but our main issue is the 300 or 400 extra homes, but the government so far not being keen to help us with that additional spend.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I asked that to staff when they came and spoke to us about it. I was told firmly that there wouldn't be any opportunity to seek further government funding, but that's something that we definitely would want to advocate for. So we would send a letter to do that. We were told that the funding envelope has been closed, and so now government will not give more, so we have to squeeze it out of council budgets. But we'd be happy to do that.
Absolutely. We're committed to pulling all the levers we can, and I look at no as a maybe, and so we'll push it as hard as we can.
Okay, thanks, Brooke. Thanks, Dan. Well put. Any discussion? None? Movers? Shane, Chris? All those in favour say aye. And against, carried. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Righty-ho, we're going to go back to public input, and Graham is here. So, Graham, great to see you. Wander on up. You've got a presentation, so it's been out on Nexus, so the floor is yours, mate. Ooh. Just a note too from, there was another request from local board input, but it was deferred, and that was from Kaipariki and Devonport Takapuna. It'll be deferred until we talk about Wairau Valley. So Graham, all yours, mate.
Thank you very much for allowing me to slide in a bit later than planned. I missed the link bus. Right, so I'll rip through this presentation as fast as I can. There's quite a bit here. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least glance at it before the meeting. So, as I say on slide 1, it was 10 weeks since the announcement of the proposed reform of Auckland Transport, part of which involves a policy-making committee, brand new, to be set up, and in the Mayor's words, Aucklanders will be back in control. Next slide, please. Or have I got the control? Where am I pointing? I'm not. Okay, there's an article that appeared just around about Christmas time with a big heading, probably written by a sub-editor, but that's the spirit of the article. Aucklanders will be back in control. So next slide. I'm still not sure which the multiple buttons here. Which one am I pressing? Left, right? The right hand button. Oh. Okay, so that's zooming in on that headline and asking the question. And next slide is What the hell? Okay, so within that same article, highlighted at the left, but I've reproduced it on the right so that it's quite clear. This joint committee that will be set up will have 3 ministerial appointees. This is completely unheard of stuff. And 3 councillors with an independent chair, and that independent chair will have to be with the agreement of the minister. So that gives the minister considerable control. Unlike every other part of the country, which has a regional land transport committee, and they've had that since 1998, 27 years ago, they get to choose their own composition of their own land transport committee, although it can include some people from outside the council. They're in control. And as far as I'm aware, none of them have ever had any members, let alone half of them, appointed by the minister. So this is an agenda from my collection. I used to attend meetings as an observer. I was never a member of the Regional Land Transport Committee, so I'm well familiar with the committee and its work. And I'll then zoom in. Right, so that's the composition of the committee. The ones with the coloured dot next to them are not elected members, and you'll see the different designations or categories that they represent. So a wide range of expertise and experience to augment the councillors. The 2 down the bottom are green because they are observers rather than members. Right, so what was the key function of the RLTC, and still is in every other region except here, is to develop a regional land transport strategy, RLTS, and a set of implementation plans. Now, the Mayor keeps talking about a transport plan, an integrated transport plan. As far as I can tell, it's the same thing, or in the same neighbourhood. It's just different words. So this is an existing system. It is widely used, and as far as I know, it's reasonably successful, and was so here up until 2010, when the government set up the Auckland Transport, which was sort of not only in control of delivery but also of policy making. And in the early days, council actually had its own transport planning team, but I could see Mike and the committee getting very frustrated back in those days because they weren't in control, and eventually that small team was disbanded. There wasn't much point trying to pretend that council had any real say in the matter. So I'm still not sure where I'm supposed to be pointing this damn thing. Here we are. Oh, so
It
we've...
just takes a couple seconds. If you point it at the computer, you are where you want to be.
Okay.
A little late.
I'm trying to go... Oh, God. There's a slide missing, because I asked the question, what about the Auckland Transport Alignment Project? I don't know what's happened to that slide, because I've got it here. Oh, there it is, there it is, there it is. Now, why has there been no reference whatsoever to the ATAP? It exists. It was set up The discussions happened in 2015. The first ATAP was launched in 2016. It's been reviewed at 3-yearly intervals since then, 2019, 2022. We should be talking about the fourth iteration this year, but apparently not. So anyway, my time is up, and so I'll move to the last slide. What is it I'm asking of you? Please do not simply accept the proposals that are out there. Question them, ask if there are alternatives or a better way. I believe the RLTC system is such a thing because the legislation is already there, the system is already there. It puts us on the same basis as every other region in the country. I don't see why Auckland is so exceptional. It has to have a totally unique system. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Graham. Good to see you. First question, Angela.
Thank you, Graham, for your presentation. I enjoyed looking at that presentation actually, because you're absolutely right in a lot of what you're saying. This isn't your first rodeo. So how much time do you think we've been losing over the years while we reinvent things that were already working quite well? It seems that that might be the people that get in the way rather than the actual model itself. So just curious as to your view about how much traction we might have lost for Auckland as we continue to relitigate what is the best model for Auckland.
That rather than begin with a blank piece of paper and devise a new system, presumably consult on it, discuss it with the select committee, legislation finally pops out, and then, as with any new system, there's always wrinkles, getting it into practical effect. Whereas Auckland used to have its own regional land transport committee. Now, unfortunately, most of you were not members back in those days because it's 15 years ago. So Al Filipina represented Manukau City as an alternate for the mayor at some meetings, and Chris Darby, North Shore City. I think the only consistent member was Mike Lee, representing the ARC. And I think Wayne attended a couple of meetings as an observer.
I attend regularly, I was an alternate.
Yeah. Well, you weren't always recorded in the minutes. Anyway, so there are a few people with some knowledge of that system, but most of you, this is new information. And I don't know why it's been ignored in the discussion so far.
Okay, we've got 3 more questions and then we'll cap it at that. So, Daniel.
Good morning, Graham. Thank you very much for your attendance and thank you for your support for Papakura High School, my old high school. Good to see you out there at the prize givings. Graham, predating Auckland Council, the Electoral College, which you're effectively describing as the old Regional Land Transport Committee, wasn't just one council though, was it? It was multiple councils, and because it was multiple councils, under that Electoral College model, nobody had full control. Is that your recollection of it?
So I think you're talking about when they set up, oh God, there was various things. There was Artnell. So yes, that was done through an electoral college, but I don't see a particular problem in having multiple voices at the table. Personally, I think that strength comes from having multiple opinions rather than having one person or one group who think they know it all. So I don't see that as a defect in the system, and that's the beauty of the Regional Land Transport Committee. This might be novel to some of you, was that not all members were politicians. And that had a big advantage, particularly in election year, because not everyone was, or a significant number of members were not concerned about their electoral prospects. They were voting on issues as they saw them from their knowledge and experience, rather than, oh, will this make me unpopular and get me unelected? So having that balance of elected and sector group members, it's not the only way of doing it. And most councils throughout New Zealand, most of the regional councils only have used the ability to appoint selectively, so they have 2 or 3 non-politicians. In Auckland, it was getting close to 50-50. There are many ways to skin a cat, but the idea of inviting the minister to the table, I don't think is remotely helpful, and certainly not putting Auckland in control.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Graham, you've followed these things for many years, and so we are all listening very respectfully, because you have that institutional memory of the history of much of this. I'm really interested to pose to you, as one of, along with my colleague Mike Lee and Jeff Dangerfield, David Warburton, we were the original architects of the ideas around ATAP, because that was to try and have the methodology from Treasury speak to Auckland speak. But it wasn't an end in itself, because it actually didn't deal with the plethora of plans that we have to this day, unfunded plans, meaning that we've got plans to take us everywhere, but if they're not implemented and they're not funded. Do you want to comment on that? Because that is one of the desirable features of the Mayor's proposal for an integrated transport plan, that we can actually then perhaps cull some of the plans and come up with something that is workable.
Well, I do see merit in that argument, but it's not a king hit. What I'm saying is that Auckland is not short of plans, never has been. Auckland is short of money, and without money, nothing happens. So money is the key, and that is why back in the days of Len Brown, I think it was, 2015, the ATAP discussions were about trying to get government agencies and the council on the same page, so that it was agreed as to what would be funded, and I guess conversely what wouldn't be funded, but they would give some certainty. Unfortunately, ATAP's been observed in the breach by Wellington, so it was a good idea, but it sort of languished somewhat. In fact, I think most Aucklanders have never heard of it, which I would like to see it reinvigorated rather than abandoned. But yes, it is important that you don't just make plans in a vacuum, which are fine in theory, but ain't going anywhere until you've got certainty of funding.
Thanks, Graham.
Okay, Morris.
Look, it's just a quick trying to get the record straight here. You were talking up on your slides about the Land Transport Act of 1998 and Section 178. That was my legislation. I remember it well. I'm still getting counselling for it because I bought in the photographic driver's licence, and it was one of the most hated things ever. It's fine now, but 178's about clean car standards. Section 178 of the Land Transport Act 19, I've got it before me. You've got your numbers wrong and you've got the wrong act. I was trying to bring in emission standards for vehicles and put limits on all sorts of emissions, which Richard Hills will be quite surprised that Morris Williamson was doing. But that's, if you go and look back, all of Part 13 of that act was all about emission standards, and Section 178's in there. So you've got your nomenclature wrong. That's all.
Well,
just go and check it.
I might have the detail wrong, but the intent and the spirit is there, and you are supported by some wonderful officers. I'm sure that Barry can put us right on which section is the relevant one. I think it is important because that legislation already exists and it has been in use for 27 years.
I've got it before me if you want to come and look at 178 about clean cars.
You can enjoy yourselves afterwards, Morris.
Okay. It's got to have a bit of fun.
I mean, it was updated in 2003, so that section was amended, but the spirit of it was still there.
Okay, and I was going to cap it there, but Mike, because your name is on that lovely old yellow faded thing that Graham put up, I'll let you go, but the question and answer could be succinct.
Thank you, Graham. And thank you for bringing this to us. I think you make a very fair point. In my experience, Auckland exceptionalism hasn't really helped Auckland at all. In terms of the current situation, you are absolutely right. Up until actually 2013, the Auckland Council and the Auckland Transport Committee was the Land Transport Committee under the Act. In 2011, I believe, after the establishment of the Super City and after the establishment of AT, the status remained with the Land Transport Committee, remained with the parent council. The government of the day changed things in an amendment bill which was enacted in 2013, making the AT board the Land Transport Committee. In other words, the Land Transport Committee is in essence part of a regional council. So is this council a regional council under the Act. So in effect we had two regional councils not necessarily on the same page, which when you think about it went right against the intent of the Super City amalgamation. And this is what I told the Select Committee when I submitted against it on behalf of Auckland Council back in 2012, I believe it was. And you've got a copy of my submission. Can I ask you, in terms of ATAP, would you not agree that ATAP is a process rather than an entity, and it is a non-statutory process, and it's not the first such process? There was one with a similar name back in the legacy days, and it was something like RTAP or something like that. And in my view, again, it was in essence the central government becoming a little bit concerned about what was going on with what was happening with the plans, the statutory plans in Auckland, and wanting to seek costings and actually more political control over them. And I think this last ATAP sprang up when AT and Auckland Council were looking at a conventional light rail system. And again, the government of the day grew concerned and initiated this ATAP process to line everything up. So would you not agree that it's not actually an entity, but a process, a political process, essentially emanating from the central government, and probably, when you think about it, an aspect which is similar to the central government taking over the Land Transport Committee, when you think about it?
There's a lot in that, and I don't have your depth of knowledge of exactly what was going on back in the day. I was scratching my head trying to work out who was in control, because there was what was written in the Act and so on, and then there seemed to be the reality. So I think it is a good thing that Auckland and Wellington are talking and collaborating and working together. I'll give you an example. The transport, what do they call themselves now? The Transit Authority has gone on an orgy of motorway building in Auckland, and it hasn't made the motorways flow any easier at rush hour. they're an awful sewer of traffic. But it then spills over onto the local road network. And so a lot of people talk about congestion, but we've built it by the way we've done things. So there has to be a better way, and both of the leaders of Auckland Transport, the CEO and the chair of the board, have both come to this committee roughly a year ago with the mantra that the only way out of this mess is to greatly improve our public transport system and ridership, the patronage, so that rather than being a minority thing, it is standing a balanced system between private car use and public transport. And we ain't going to get that if the policy and strategy is being driven by the sort of thinking we're seeing from our transport ministers. They either don't get it or they don't believe in it, and so they pay a bit of lip service to public transport, but they don't really. So we need to be in charge of our transport system, not Wellington. Once we've worked out what our policy is, then we can talk to Wellington.
Okay. Thank you, Graham, for taking the time to come along. Someone like to move that we receive and thank. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Julie. Those in favour say aye, and against carried. Thank you, Graham. Well done. Okay, we have no items of extraordinary business, and so the first item up on the agenda is the City Rail Link, and